Level generation. Ever since the release of Rogue, the majority of its successors in the near half a century have been using it as a way to increase the replay value of a game, or make it unpredictable so you can't just brute force your way through. It could be a large collection of preset levels that are being combined together randomly, or it could be using one of the many possible algorithms to generate them randomly. Both have their benefits and drawbacks. Presets have far more developer control to make guaranteed good level design, but come at the cost of needing to make hundreds, if not thousands, of custom rooms for different worlds. Otherwise, it ends up being repetitive and the player can lose interest quicker, regardless of how good the fundamentals are. Complete random generation avoids those issues because the likelihood of seeing the same room more than once is greatly diminished. However, any algorithm runs the risk of generating something that might be unfair or just plain not fun to play. So you may need to consider regenerating the whole thing or add constraints to try and reduce the likelihoods of these bad results appearing. I have chosen the latter for level generation because I'm just one ball. Game development is hard enough as it is, and my thought process at this decision was that random generation is going to be less time consuming than thinking through level patterns and having them be put together. Yes, I am foreshadowing here. Like with character movement in my previous video, the first thing to always do is learn what other games have done and figure out what might fit well here. And there's tons of material to read through. You've got your binary space partitioning, cellular automata, your wave function collapse, using Voronoi diagrams, or Perlin noise. My problem is that all these algorithms are great if you're trying to create dungeons, caves, natural erosion. What I am looking for is something that resembles a building, not a cave. It's going to naturally be a lot more rectangular. An even bigger problem is that, again, I'm using the level design of invisible ink as inspiration, meaning the existence of thin walls. None of the algorithms I just mentioned are capable of creating quality levels with thin walls, unless you define the grid to character size ratios in a very particular way. So, I spent some time digging deeper on if anyone had ever done anything similar. And I managed to find exactly one result during this phase of someone having asked this exact question in Reddit of all places, and conveniently enough, also edited their post and added what they used as a solution. This is the link to the post itself, but I'm going to describe how it works here. First, you place any kind of room in a position of your choice. Next, you pick a direction that a new room is going to fall from. The room will start moving ever faster until it collides with the room you just created. You now have a general idea where the thin wall is placed on one direction. Secondly, you pick a random direction perpendicular to this and start sliding the place in that direction. If it collides with another room, then there you go. You've combined it together with two spots and can build your room up there. If it doesn't collide with anything and is about to lose connection with the original room, then you stop it from doing so. Finally, you pick one of the spots where a thin wall is supposed to be for every connected room direction and cut a hole in it, or put a door there. And then you just keep doing this until you've got an entire floor built. Now granted, there are some caveats with the explanation here. The original post didn't mention this, but a new room could easily miss the other rooms and end up who knows where. If you have a preset grid size and you're aiming to fill it all up, then it might be fine, but you're more likely not going to want this and you will get unintended side effects. So here are some things that I altered. I made the entire collection of rooms be updated with a rectangle that can fit it all inside. The logic is that when you randomly pick a falling direction and position, as long as one tile ends up overlapping the X or Y coordinates of the large rectangle, it's guaranteed to hit something. By extension, this also means you don't need to start falling from the edge of the entire world. You can just put it right next to the large rectangle and save some processing power. Also, I decided that the starting position is going to be randomly placed along the bottom edge of the entire game world, and that a corridor will be placed on top of it. This is mostly to limit the amount of work needed when interpreting the place you start as an elevator. I don't suddenly need to make extra prevention things that would end up with multi-directional doors for it, or even weird corner doors. This by extension also means that there are 3 directions where a room can fall from, so take that into account as well. There are more things that I changed, but all of this right now is enough to start creating the base code. We define what a single tile is, it has a position, it can hold information on if a character is currently occupying it, and if it might be holding some form of interactable on it, or something like a post that can also block vision. Next is a rectangle, which is the coordinates and size of a collection of tiles. This rectangle can then be used as the basis of a room being dropped and colliding, yada yada. We just talked about this. The next part is creating a collection of thin walls that will be placed between the 2 rooms. In terms of pure logic, it's not that bad. You have a set of positions for vertical and horizontal walls, and then just need to take the quirks and how you do integer checks in between tiles into account. The more annoying part is actually visualizing these, because the easiest solution ends up with the creation of a completely flat wall. Now, I'd consider the immersion breaking the moment you realize that doors would be in a similar position. And my solution for a proper realistic representation was a massive pain. A collection of grid maps for every possible wall direction with some offset from the tile edge to give depth, and posts with tons of annoying checks just to make sure that all of their texture colors are correctly matched in the correct room. And even with all of that, if you'd look inside a thin wall, you could see lines everywhere, which was really annoying. So add even more checks for the posts to check which directions are already being covered by thin walls, and then not rendering the parts that the player isn't supposed to see. Not fun. Once all that was done, however, the last thing was to take one part of the thin wall, not add it during the initial adding process, and instead placing a door there. For this, I took a good hard look at everything I had done by this point and just tossed it away. I just loaded in a separate door model that has already defined an opening and closing animation. You walk to the door, it opens, you walk away, it closes. I'll probably have to make the animation much faster or open it from the sides so there aren't any clipping issues, but that's when I actually get to the visuals part. The point is that I can change the door model with something else, and as long as it has opening and closing animations, it'll work. Okay, cool. A bunch of rooms have been created. It doesn't look good. Well, okay, that's not really true, but I'm not particularly satisfied with it in this state for 2 reasons. The first one is that there are way too many small rooms everywhere with the exact same shapes. It looks too samey when moving from one room to another. The other problem is that there are way too many doors everywhere. Fortunately, I have an idea that solves both of these problems. Not adding thin walls. A room can have one of 3 randomly assigned texture types, and if a newly created room collides with another room that's using the same texture, just skip adding a thin wall there. All of a sudden, the visual variety of rooms has become really varied and interesting to traverse. Gives an impression that the architects were forced to make concessions for weird floor plans due to silly demands. As for reducing doors, we can make it so that a new room has collided with an existing room, and we know they are going to be combined into one large room. Then we can just skip adding doors for the other walls. Theoretically, they should already be connected through doors from the first half of the room. It's that simple. Even with all of this, random chance can create undesirable levels. Maybe they split into several different parts that take too long to traverse. Maybe one room ends up becoming too large. I extended the room placement algorithm to allow altering the probabilities of stuff. How many rooms are allowed to be added? What are the general size limits of a single room? How large is the likelihood preference that the second collision direction of a room is intentionally aiming towards the center to reduce them from splitting apart? Then also, if the room doesn't collide with a second room, how much can it randomly decide to move back with a modifier to alter the pushback intensity? And finally, a bias to decide if a room is more likely to fall from the top, instead of left or right directions. I can use these variables in the future to possibly change level structures depending on the level or world too, so there is flexibility to toy around with it. So we can generate levels, video's over, right? Unfortunately not, this is only the halfway point. Yeah, sure, the generated stuff looks cool and you could make a game with this, but if this is all it is, even with enemies, the game would become boring super fast. You need stuff that you can touch and move around, that the enemies might need to move around. If stealth plays a defining role, you need something inside of a room that you can hide behind. You get the point. This freaking part, is where I just constantly felt like taking pauses and barely making any progress from hours to days to weeks. There's not a lot of info on the topic of filling a room with stuff. It's only the room generation itself that gets talked about. So I had to make my own thing, from scratch, my own original interpretation. I call it interactable rules, a set of parameters that define how large a room can be, how many doors there need to be, how many chunks it's built out of. Every room independently checks through all these rules to find which ones fit it, to then pick one or a few out of them randomly. Then the contents of the rule are further divided into several collections of interactables with their positions that they should occupy in a room when placed randomly into it, with additional constraints on how much they can be added, if some parts of the adding process are ignored, or if there needs to be spacing, and so on. Think of it like one chunk is the placement of a table, then a second chunk is a chair somewhere else randomly, or defining the chunk to make sure the table and chair are right next to each other. In order to try and prevent certain types of bad placements from happening, I separated adding a chunk collection to the edge and anywhere in the center as separate placement positions, as well as making it impossible for stuff to be placed into a corner. It should work now, so we tried running through a few tests and... okay. There was a miscalculation on chunk placement if it's larger than one tile. Here's what's going on. This is a chunk of interactables, and this is the root position of the chunk. My thought process is that when a chunk is placed down, then all the spots where it was placed in will be excluded. If the next interactable chunk has any overlapping tiles with this spot, then you can't add it. Makes sense, right? However, what I'm really supposed to be excluding is all of these tiles as well. If you place your new chunk in any of these positions, you'll immediately realize that, yes, there is overlap happening in these situations as well. And that this type of exclusion means if you pick a new chunk to start adding in, then that will need to recalculate all the valid spots where stuff can be put in. Kind of a pain. Right, we try again and... a door got blocked off. Very well. Just remove the door positions as valid spots so that this can't ever happen, and then we can... Okay. If a chunk has a root position on a center tile, and any other interactable collides with an edge tile, we won't allow adding it. So now we can... Okay, seriously, fine. Pass the actual A-star pathing data into the mix as well and try ruling points to prematurely temporarily imitate as you've placed an interactable collection down, checking that from every door within the room you can move to any other door without being blocked off. But actually this can still technically lead to the rooms being connected to a long way around, meaning doors can still get blocked. So you create a new A-star pathing to only take the tiles that are actually part of the room collection so it doesn't accidentally do that. Allow you to properly verify that the location that you're putting a thing down can end up screwing you over. But then there is still the problem where a room is only connected by one door, where that gets blocked out. So you now have to make a special room that maybe rooms with only one door are not allowed. Massive rules that can create the situation from the other side, making it possible to prevent this issue from happening in the first place. My brain is mush. It's swirling within the containments of my mortal flesh, sending shocks to my fingers as I spend days wondering how anyone was ever supposed to figure this stuff out. Yes, you can theoretically use bitmap images to generate patterns that are turned into rooms. Yes, you can just make pre-generated rooms and glue them together. But I unfortunately don't have the time or patience to figure out the alternatives because I have a day job. Am I even doing this right? Does this even make sense? Do you care? Should I even care? I mean, the player won't care, and it works. Who cares if the code is garbage at this point? It works. Ship it. A finished game is better than no game. At least it can't get any worse, right? It can.